Okay, folks, this week's returning guest was on our show in the last off-season. Delighted to have him back on to discuss what has been, quite frankly, a crazy off-season to date. A guy that had a 7-year NFL career from 2001 2007. Nowadays, very well known across the NFL world online for his great podcast, the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, covering NFL games from a betting perspective, with the Even Money Podcast. Does Westwood One as well, among many other things. Check out rosstucker.com for his podcast as well, at Ross Tucker NFL. Ross Tucker, a very, very warm welcome back onto the show. How are you, man?
I am awesome. What's up, dudes? I love being on in Ireland. Love talking to you guys. Thank you guys so much for having me on the show. I've never been to Ireland, but I really, really want to go. That's on the list, I can assure you.
Ross, you look like, I think, from the outside, you look like one of the busiest guys in football. Like, you're doing something every weekend, whether it's commentating. It never stops for you. You must be surprised at how crazy this off-season has been, because, it can always get a bit mental, but the last few weeks and months have just been crazy, yeah?
You know what? It really has. And I don't remember other off seasons being like this. I think a lot of it is the impact we've seen of Tom Brady and Matthew Stafford the last 2 years. The last 2 years, teams made bold quarterback moves. The Bucks found a way to get Brady. The Rams made the big trade for Stafford, and they won the Super Bowl. I mean, they won the whole thing, right? So now what you're seeing is more teams willing to do whatever it takes to try to get the quarterback that they think can be a difference maker to get them to the Super Bowl, and more quarterbacks willing to sort of exert their influence a little bit and say they want out. I mean, it was very clear Russell Wilson wanted out of Seattle. It was pretty obvious that Brady wanted out of New England at the end. Stafford had told Detroit he wanted to leave. So we're just seeing more quarterback movement than we ever used to. Before, if the guy was a pretty good quarterback, he kind of was with that team forever, or at least with that team till the team said we don't want him anymore. That's not the case. Detroit would have still wanted Stafford. Seattle would have still wanted Russell Wilson. The Patriots on some level would have still wanted Brady. And they wanted him on the cheap because that's Belichick, but what are you going to do? So it's things are changing. And I think it was quarterbacks the last couple of years. Now it's sort of expanding to other positions. Obviously, the most notable one this offseason being wide receiver.
Ross, in honor of welcoming you back to the show and show me your beer, I'll say sláinte to you to have you back on. And I suppose piggybacking a little bit on that, the off-season moves, and one of your former teams brought in the Deshaun Watson, and I know you've discussed this with Schefter on your own Ross Tucker Football podcast, and with Andrew Brandt as well. I'm just interested in, kind of something you talked a little bit about with Schefter was around Baker Mayfield. And obviously we've now had the voluntary camp. Baker didn't show up. I'm just interested because obviously, look, this is Deshaun's team, but as Andrew says, he could be facing a lengthy suspension. We don't know. They brought Jacoby Brissett in as the backup, you would imagine. But in terms of Baker and where he goes, by not sitting out, he kind of makes life a little bit easy for the Browns, right? Because it's still Deshaun's team. Deshaun gets to run everything. I suppose he doesn't put himself in harm's way. Is somebody at some point going to step up and pay the $18.8 million for Baker?
Definitely not. Nope. He's going to end up being traded, and it's going to end up being Seattle or Carolina. All they're doing right now is playing a leverage game, playing chicken, whatever you want to call it, with the amount of money that each side's going to pay. So there was a recent report that Carolina said, hey, we'll pay Baker $6 million and give you a draft choice. You got to pay the other 12.8. And Cleveland said, nah, we can get a better deal than that. So it's going to happen, right? Now, I don't know if it'll be Seattle or Carolina, but it's going to happen that Baker Mayfield gets traded. And because Cleveland, it does them no good to cut him and not get anything back and still pay him $18 million, right? That doesn't help them because it's fully guaranteed. So essentially what's going to happen is the Browns are really going to be paying for a draft choice. And it's a matter of how much they're going to pay to get what draft choice for Baker Mayfield. So my guess is if Carolina already offered 6, maybe they meet more in the middle. Maybe Carolina ends up paying 10 and Cleveland pays 8.8 or Seattle. I don't know which one it is, but eventually it feels like that's going to happen. I think both sides just think that they have the power position in negotiation, right? Carolina says, well, you don't want that guy at training camp. That'd be a mess. You're not going to show up to training camp and let Baker be there. And Cleveland saying, well, you're not going to start Sam Darnold again. Matt Rule's on the hot seat. You need Baker Mayfield. So little game of chicken being played, and I think it'll get sorted out eventually.
Ross, the last couple of years, offensive line in particular is getting more scrutiny. I think it's been recognized how important it is whilst it's a quarterback-driven league. I mean, we saw the Chiefs lose to the Bucs and essentially rip up that offensive line the next season. Steelers did it. Russell Wilson complained that he was getting no protection. Four draft picks in the top 40 in 2020. This year, 3 in the top 10. The 3 this year in particular, Neil Ekwonu, Cross, from your experience having played offensive line, was it consistent where you thought they'd go, and who do you think is the standout of the 3?
I think they probably went about where I thought they'd go. Kenyon Green going 15 to the Texans was probably a little bit higher than I thought he would go. I didn't quite understand the Seattle Seahawks drafting a pass-blocking left tackle in the first round, a pass-blocking right tackle in the third round, and a running back in the second round to run the ball more. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. We know Seattle wants to run the ball. I don't really understand why they took 2 pass-blocking offensive tackles. I think Ekwonu and Evan Neal are really good players. I think Evan Neal is probably the safer player from a pass-blocking standpoint. We all have our natural biases in life, right? Biases, I don't know. Anyway, I think they both work. Mine is I like physicality. I like people that are physically trying to punish the guy they're going against. I mean, let me let you guys in and everybody in Ireland on a little secret. Blocking people's not really fun. Trying to kick somebody's ass, trying to physically punish them, smash them into the ground, trying to hurt, not injure, trying to hurt them, that's fun. That's the joy I derived from the sport. Like, it was nice when a guy scored a touchdown. That was satisfying. I felt some stuff. But what I really enjoyed was hitting another human being as hard as I can and like feeling their breath come out of their chest a little bit, or just when you pancake them, just feel like the deflation, that I don't know. I think sometimes people are afraid to admit that that's what you like about the sport. Why? I mean, that's why so many people play when you're younger. I don't know why. It goes back thousands of years. But men like to run into another man as hard as they can and knock them over. It's hilarious. For some reason, it feels good. I don't know. It just does. And I think it's okay to admit that. It's like a primal, barbaric thing. I don't know. Why do guys get in fights? I mean, I'm not going to stereotype anything, but I'm sure you guys have seen some fights outside of pubs in your life. I mean, geez, you're in Ireland, right? Like, it's fun. Like, why is it when there's a fight, it's amazingly entertaining to be right as close as you can and watch them punch each other? It's amazing, right? Like, we like watching that. Well, I'm one of the people that liked actually doing it. I like being the one fighting. I like being the one hitting. And I miss that. And I don't even remember your question, but I know that Ekwonu is a player and he's going to try to pancake people. And this is the type of stuff we talk about on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Oh, by the way, let me forget this before I forget. You guys like to bet, right? In Ireland?
We do. Colin in particular loves a no bet.
Okay. Even Money Podcast. That's the betting one. If you like betting on the NFL, It's the Even Money podcast. We have crushed it over the last 5 years. My co-host is a professional bettor who was up like 70 units last year. So I want to make sure I mentioned that one. You got to know your audience. I was pretty confident that people in Ireland like to bet.
Definitely check that out, folks. I know I'll be checking it out, and I know Brian Ross loves little flutter on the NFL, so he'll definitely be checking that out in the season. Which you're talking about, why you love and have loved playing the game, Ross, and even watching the game. We're now under 100 days away from the season as this show goes out. One of your former teams, the Bills, had a really obviously tough loss in the playoffs last year. They've had some changes in regards to the coaching in this offseason. They start in under 100 days now in LA against the Rams. You're talking about betting. They're the bookies' favourites for the Super Bowl this coming season, at least here. Do you see them falling into like a win now category, almost NBA style, like Rams style? They need to try and win it now. This is their window. Or do you think they may look at it in a more long-term view?
Well, I'm a little bit nervous for them. I have my greatest affinity of all the teams I play for is the Buffalo Bills. So I played for Washington, the Dallas Cowboys, the Bills, the Browns, the Patriots. But Buffalo was my favorite. I played the most there. I made the most money. I made the best relationships. It was just awesome. But it makes me a little bit nervous how everybody's saying they're the best team. Everybody's saying they're the favorites. It's making me a little bit nervous. If we learned anything from last year's postseason, it's hard. I'm sure they'll be in the playoffs, but it's hard to win those 3 or 4 playoff games and win the Super Bowl. Think about every game the Bengals barely beat the Raiders in the wild card. Then the Titans, Bengals, every game was close. Seemingly every game could go either way. So ultimately, what you really need, I think, is to be in the mix every year. And then like the Chiefs, some years you'll get over the hump. You'll get to the Super Bowl. Maybe one year you'll win it. Other years you won't. I called that Bucs-Rams game where Tom Brady and the Bucs came all the way back. And then Stafford made that incredible throw to Cup for the Rams to still win it. But that could easily have been the Bucs winning that one. And then history changes again for Stafford and Brady and everything. So I definitely think the Bills will be in the mix. But I think they'll be in the mix the next few years. However, they've got a lot of stud players in their prime. They need to get there sooner rather than later. This will be a couple years ago. They had a good opportunity and they weren't able to get done the AFC Championship game. This past year, I still don't know how they lost that game in the divisional round. What they need to do is not lose to the Jaguars in the regular season so that they have to play these games on the road. They got to take care of business, and they got to win and get home field advantage. I do not expect anybody to go into Buffalo and win a playoff game. That place will be a madhouse. I went to the last 3 Buffalo home playoff games. I called those games on the radio. Incredible. Those people, incredible. They're like Ireland's spirit animals, okay, when it comes to their fandom. It was like a U2 concert in Dublin or something. By the way, is that like a huge cliche? Was that really lame that I just said that, or is that something you guys appreciate?
I think that's a fair comparison. We'd love to welcome Bills Mafia to Dublin. I'd say it'd be good crack. Ross, I suppose alongside your own podcast and alongside tweeting, you are a guest on this podcast, but also on the Rich Eisen show. We've had Rich join us, and a few weeks back, you talked about the Saints on Rich's show, and immediately some Saints fans memified you and put your quotes onto various pictures on Twitter. You said, you have some concerns around the Saints and, being without Sean Payton and Jameis, and maybe that, they think that they're a little bit better than they really are. I'm wondering, are there other teams around the league that maybe you think are a little bit overhyped, or maybe fans are expecting a little bit too much out of teams this year?
Yeah, I mean, the Saints are a big one. And here's the thing that's so interesting to me about the Saints. You know, I think they'll be like an 8 or 9 win team, maybe 10. I think they're around 500. And their season win total, for people that we talk about on the Even Money Betting podcast, is 8. It's 8. I actually think they'll probably win 9, maybe 10. My point was, with all the moves the Saints are making, Jarvis Landry and Tyrann Mathieu and trading up with the Eagles to get that first round pick and trading up again with Washington to get Olave, it feels like the Saints feel like they're like a Super Bowl contender. It feels like they're pushing to be a Super Bowl contender, and I just don't see that. I don't think they're a Super Bowl contender. The most important 2 factors in a team winning the Super Bowl are probably head coach and quarterback. Saints have serious questions at both. Dennis Allen was not too hot his first stint with the Raiders. And by the way, the Saints fans that get all mad at me, it's like, wait a minute. Aren't you the same guys that think Sean Payton's a Hall of Fame coach? So you lost your Hall of Fame coach, but you're going to act like that means nothing? You can't have it both ways. You can't say Sean Payton's a Hall of Fame coach and then also say, it doesn't matter. He didn't care anymore anyway. Like, no, doesn't work that way. Logic, I took logic at Princeton University, philosophy 201, my only B-, I remember, doesn't work that way. And then Jameis, who knows? I mean, he played pretty well last year, but I'll believe that Jameis leads a team deep into the playoffs when I see it. So I think they'll be fine. I think they might even make the playoffs. I believe they're operating like a team that thinks they have a chance to win the championship, and they don't.
Ross, you spoke of the chess game that is going on between Baker and potentially the Panthers and Browns. I suppose another quarterback situation, Jimmy G. When John Lynch was at the Combine in February, he was very relaxed about the whole situation, said that Jimmy G will get traded and Trey Lance is our quarterback for the long term. Over the month, as the months have progressed, there's kind of mixed views coming out as to whether Trey Lance is good enough to start immediately come the new season. Do you see a scenario where Jimmy G could potentially still be there with this kind of injury that I suppose he hasn't got over the operation as yet?
No, I don't see a situation where he's there because of his salary. In fact, I think they'd probably cut him rather than have him on the books for that salary. I don't see that happening. I do think there will be interest in a trade for him, and I do think they'll be able to trade him. I think the interesting thing about that is just his salary and what that ends up being. Nobody really knows. I think that's the other reason, by the way, that Carolina feels like, getting back to our initial conversation about Baker Mayfield, I think that's the other reason that the Niners or that the Carolina Panthers feel like they can sort of slow play it. I don't think they believe that Jimmy G would get traded to Seattle. So I think Carolina thinks that they can maybe leverage the Niners against the Browns to get the better of the deal on Jimmy G or Baker Mayfield. That's kind of how I look at it.
Last round of questions, Ross. Been very generous for your time. Look, as a man that does many different things, including commentary, especially commentary, how shocked were you whenever you seen the Tom Brady contract? Was it $375 million for 10 years? This is crazy money, yeah. And for a guy we haven't seen yet in the booth, but it really sets a new precedent. At this point now, Ross, it's just crazy stuff.
Yeah. So as a guy that calls games, I'm always a little conflicted with these because I also have 3 small businesses, right, including the podcast business. I don't think people tune into a game or not based on who the announcer is. I think they tune into a game or not because of who the teams are that are playing. So I think on the one hand, it's hard for me to justify that much money if it's not bringing in more ratings, right? And more money. On the other hand, it's good for me, right? Like the more money you raise the guys at the top, the more money the next guys will get. And then the guys after that, and I don't even know where I am on the ladder, but I'm somewhere on the ladder. So hopefully the rising tide rises all boats or whatever, right? So I think that's good for me. I think the most interesting one is in fact Brady, because Romo, he was being paid after he had done it for a while. Aikman, he was being paid after he'd done it for a while. We can still have that same discussion, but at least those networks saw those guys perform and felt like they were worth that amount. What if Brady stinks? Like what if he's not good? That would not be good for Fox at all if the contract terms are true. So I think he'll be pretty good, but so much of it is just a natural personality, and Tom's always pretty buttoned up. I'll be really curious to see what he's like in that role. I mean, I know he'll be prepared, that's for sure, but I'll be curious to see what he's like in that role.
It'll certainly be interesting. And as you mentioned earlier, you have an affiliation, I suppose, with the NFC East, having played for the Commanders and the Cowboys, and you do a lot of work with the Eagles for Westwood One. And it's been quite the offseason for the Eagles, and Philadelphia is a city dear to my heart. But all of us, I think, agreed on the show recently that the Eagles are favourites for the division, we felt. I suppose I'm wondering, would that be your opinion as well?
I would say co-favorites with the Cowboys. There was a decent separation between the two last year. Thought the Cowboys were clearly better. So I think the Eagles have gotten a little bit better. I think the Cowboys have gotten a little bit worse. I think they're both probably about 10-win teams, would be my guess.
Rob, the Dolphins have made a lot of moves this offseason. We touched on the Bills earlier, and the Jets, well, they're in a bit of a rebuild, seem to be moving in the right direction. The Patriots, everybody's talking about Mac Jones this offseason. He's doing this, he's doing that. Are you concerned for the Patriots this year? They got such a going over in that playoff game against the Bills. How will they react? Are they going quietly about their business, but they'll be a strong side again this year?
I think they'll be about what they were last year. I don't really see a whole lot of improvement. Their draft was curious to me. Yeah. Moving on from Shaq Mason, I don't see the major improvement. I don't think they're as good as Buffalo. I know they're not as good as Buffalo. I'm not sure they're as good as Miami. I think it's another 500 year for the Patriots. I think it's maybe the playoffs, but I don't know. I mean, look up how many playoff wins Bill Belichick has without Tom Brady. It's not real good.
I love it, Ross. And folks, if you want to hear more of Ross, you can listen to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money Podcast. Check out at Ross Tucker NFL on Twitter. Ross, massively appreciate your time. Hopefully chat to you again soon.
Absolutely. Have me on anytime, guys. Thank you so much. Had a blast. I'm glad we were able to make this happen.